The architect of time, beyond the clock's edge. Look closely at the clock hanging on your wall. Listen to its heartbeat, that rhythmic, mechanical tick-tock that governs your life. We are raised to believe that time is the ultimate authority. A steady, relentless river flowing at a constant speed, indifferent to our joys or our sorrows. We treat the second hand as an absolute truth, a universal constant that marches forward with unwavering precision. But you are wrong. In the early months of 1905, in a modest, cramped apartment in Bern, Switzerland, a 26-year-old man was about to dismantle the very foundation of reality. He wasn't a prestigious professor at a world-class university. He wasn't surrounded by expensive glass beakers or high-tech laboratories. In the eyes of the academic elite, he was a nobody, a third-class technical clerk at the Swiss Patent Office. His days were spent reviewing the mundane inventions of others, and his nights were spent in the company of a worn-out violin and a stack of scribbled papers. Yet this outsider possessed something far more powerful than a laboratory. He possessed a haunting, persistent question that had lived in the back of his mind since he was 16 years old. If I could ride a beam of light, what would the universe look like? The death of certainty. Most people look at the world and see facts. Albert Einstein looked at the world and saw riddles. While his peers were busy memorizing the established laws of Newtonian physics, Einstein was busy imagining the impossible. He realized that the mechanical clock on the wall was a liar. Through his thought experiments, he proved that time is not a fixed stage upon which the universe performs. Rather, time is a flexible fabric, woven together with space itself into a four-dimensional tapestry we now call space-time. He showed us that if you move fast enough, if you approach the speed of light, time actually slows down. It stretches. It warps. To a man standing still, a minute is a minute. But to a man traveling through the stars at incredible speeds, that same minute could last an eternity. This wasn't just math. It was a revolution of the soul. He proved that the steady march of time is merely a perspective, an illusion created by our slow-moving lives. In that one miracle year, the lowly clerk proved that time can shrink, it can expand, and at the edge of light, it can almost stand still. Knowledge versus the mystery. We are often taught in school that knowledge is a destination. We study to find the right answer, to pass the test, to reach the end of the book. We treat education as a mountain to be climbed, believing that once we reach the summit, we will finally see the world clearly. But Einstein's journey taught us the opposite. He discovered that the more we know, the more mysterious the universe becomes. Every answer he found only revealed 10 more questions, each deeper and more profound than the last. He didn't seek to finish physics. He sought to dance with the unknown. For Einstein, the universe wasn't a puzzle to be solved and discarded. It was an infinite cathedral of mystery. The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious, he once noted. It is the source of all true art and all science. When you think you have seen it all, when you believe you have reached the final destination of knowledge, you haven't succeeded. You have simply stopped growing. The moment you lose your sense of awe, the moment you stop asking why, the clock starts ticking in a different way. It stops being a tool of measurement and starts being a countdown to intellectual stagnation. The power of the outsider. Why did it take a patent clerk to see what the greatest scientists of the age missed? Because Einstein was an outsider. He wasn't blinded by the certainties of the establishment. He didn't have the luxury of expensive equipment, so he used his imagination as his primary tool. he played his violin to let his mind wander through the vibrations of the cosmos. He understood that logic will get you from A to B, but imagination will take you everywhere. His life is a testament to the fact that you don't need a prestigious title or $1 million budget to change the world. You need the courage to be wrong. You need the persistence to stay with a question long after others have given up. And most importantly, you need to realize that the rules of the world, the steady march of time, the limits of what is possible, are often just shadows on a wall. The eternal question. So, the next time you look at a clock, don't just see a machine telling you you're late for a meeting. See a reminder of the great mystery. Remember the man who sat in a quiet room in Ban and dared to challenge the stars. The universe is not a static place of cold facts. It is a living, breathing, warping playground of light and shadow. Your growth as a human being is not measured by how many answers you have collected, but by how many beautiful mysteries you are still brave enough to pursue. Don't just watch the clock move forward, ride the beam of light. Keep asking the questions that haunt you, because in the heart of the mystery, time doesn't just pass, it begins. The Outcast Architect, Choosing the Unknown. Today, the name Einstein is a global shorthand for brilliance. We see his face on posters, his equations on chalkboards, and his legacy in every piece of technology that utilizes GPS or laser light. But if you were to walk into a classroom in Munich in the late 1890s, you would not find a celebrated prodigy. Instead, you would find a silent, brooding teenager sitting at the back of the room, his eyes fixed on the window rather than the blackboard. The academic system of the time did not see a future Nobel laureate. It saw a disgrace. They called him the Quiet One, the prison of rote memorization. The educational machine of 19th century Germany was built on the pillars of discipline, authority, and rote memorization. Students were expected to be empty vessels, waiting to be filled with dates, names, and formulas dictated by stern instructors. In this rigid atmosphere, Albert Einstein was a profound malfunction. To his teachers, his silence was not a sign of deep thought, but of defiance, or worse, mental slowness. He didn't speak his first words until age 3, and even as a student, he hesitated before answering, as if translating a foreign language in his head. One headmaster famously told Albert's father that it didn't matter what profession the boy chose, because he would never make a success of anything. But Albert wasn't slow. While his classmates were busy memorizing the height of mountains or the names of long-dead kings, Albert was busy listening to the hidden music of physics. To him, the universe was not a collection of dead facts to be stored in a ledger. It was a living, breathing symphony of forces. He was fascinated by the invisible threads that held the stars in place and the mysterious magnetism that tugged at a compass needle. He was hearing a melody that the system was too loud and too arrogant to perceive. The box and the breakout society has always tried to force its outliers into a box. The box has many names: tradition, curriculum, common sense, or the way things are done. For Albert, the box was suffocating. He saw that the school system was designed to produce obedient soldiers and clerks, not thinkers. It demanded that he sacrifice his curiosity for the sake of a diploma. At the age of 16, Albert faced a crossroads. He could stay in the box, endure the military-style drills of his gymnasium, and live a life of quiet resentment. Or he could walk away. He chose the latter, and the cost was immense. In an act of radical self-determination, he did not just drop out of school. He effectively erased his identity. He renounced his German citizenship to avoid military service, making himself a man without a country. He gave up the security of a traditional career path and the approval of his family to follow a compass needle that pointed toward the unknown. This was not an act of teenage rebellion. It was a calculated trade. He traded his security for his intellectual soul. He became a stateless wanderer, a tutor, and eventually a patent clerk, all so he could keep his mind free to ask the questions that actually mattered. The first rule of greatness. We often talk about the eureka moments of genius, but we rarely talk about the loneliness that precedes them. This is the first rule of greatness, and perhaps the most painful. You must be willing to be misunderstood if you want to be exceptional. To be exceptional means, by definition, to exist outside the norm. If you are doing something that everyone understands and approves of, you are likely not changing the world. Einstein understood that if he wanted to see what no one else had seen, he had to go where no one else was willing to go. He had to accept being called slow by those who couldn't keep up with his thoughts. He had to accept being called a failure by those who measured success through certificates rather than insights. The freedom of the outsider. When Albert eventually landed in the Swiss patent office, he was still an outsider. But this outsider status was his greatest asset. Because he wasn't part of the academic establishment, he didn't have to defend their old, broken theories. He didn't have a reputation to protect or a boss to please. He was a clerk by day and a god of physics by night. In the silence of his exile, he found the space to rewrite the laws of the universe. He turned his Quiet One label into a shield. In the stillness, he realized that space and time were not what they seemed. He realized that mass and energy were two sides of the same coin. He did all of this because he had the courage to walk away from the box and follow his own internal compass. The legacy of the misfit. Einstein's journey is a reminder to anyone who feels like they don't fit into the system. Whether it is a school, a corporate culture, or a social circle, the system is designed to maintain the status quo. It is designed for the average. But the progress of humanity has never been driven by the average. It is driven by those who are disgraces in the eyes of the rigid, those who hear a music that others ignore. If the world is trying to force you into a box today, remember the boy in Munich. Remember that being misunderstood is often the tax you pay for being ahead of your time. Don't be afraid of the silence. Don't be afraid to walk away from a certain future to chase an uncertain truth. For it is only when you are willing to lose the world's approval that you finally gain the freedom to change it. The symphony of space, when logic becomes music. Picture a narrow apartment on Kamgasse Street in Bern, Switzerland. It is the dead of night. The year is 1905, and the cobblestone streets below are silent, bathed in the pale glow of gaslight. While the rest of the world sleeps, lost in the comfort of traditional certainties, a light flickers in a small, cramped room. Inside, a 26-year-old man stands alone. He is not hunched over a calculator, nor is he buried under a mountain of textbooks. Instead, he holds a violin. This man is Albert Einstein. As he draws the bow across the strings, the wooden body of the instrument vibrates against his shoulder. To a casual observer, he might look like a man seeking a simple escape from the drudgery of his day job at the patent office. But Albert is not playing for entertainment. He is not seeking applause. He is playing because he has reached a wall that logic cannot climb. He is playing to find the notes that physics hasn't found a name for yet. The resonance of the soul. For Einstein, music and physics were not two different worlds. They were two different languages describing the same magnificent reality. He famously said that if he were not a physicist, he would probably be a musician. He didn't just play music, he lived in it. When a mathematical problem became too dense, when the equations began to blur into a meaningless fog, Einstein would pick up his violin, his beloved Lena, and play Mozart or Bach. In those moments, the rigid boundaries of the observable world began to melt away. Every vibration of the string was a piece of relativity taking shape. He wasn't just hearing a melody. He was feeling the vibrations of the universe itself. He understood a secret that most modern professionals have forgotten. Sometimes, to solve a big problem, you don't need to think harder. You need to feel deeper. Logic can take you from point A to point B. It is a tool for measurement and verification. But logic is a closed system. It can only work with what is already known. To reach into the unknown, to touch the hidden music of the stars, you need intuition. You need the kind of abstract emotional resonance that only art can provide. As the bow danced across the strings, Einstein wasn't just thinking about light. He was feeling its rhythm. He was imagining himself as a wave, a pulse of energy moving through an infinite sea of space-time. The miracle of the outsider. What happened in that small room in 1905 remains one of the greatest intellectual explosions in human history. We call it his annus mirabilis, his miracle year. In a span of just a few months, this outsider, this patent clerk who was ignored by the academic elite, published 4 papers that effectively tore the sky apart. He didn't do it from a throne of power. He didn't have a team of researchers or a massive government grant. He did it from a desk of curiosity, fueled by the late-night sessions with his violin. First, he explained the nature of light, proving it was made of particles called photons. Then, he proved the existence of atoms. But his most earth-shaking revelation was the special theory of relativity. He dared to suggest that time was not a constant, that it was a flexible fabric tied to the speed of light. And finally, almost as a postscript to his brilliance, he gave the world the most famous equation of all time. E equals mc squared. 3 letters that changed the world. E equals mc squared. 3 letters, 1 constant, and a world of implications. This wasn't just a formula. It was a revelation that mass and energy are merely 2 different forms of the same thing. It told us that even a tiny amount of matter contains a dormant, terrifying amount of energy. It explained why the sun shines and how the stars are born. But the most incredible part of this discovery is its origin. It didn't come from a place of cold, clinical detachment. It came from a man who allowed his mind to wander into the realms of the impossible. It came from a man who trusted his gut as much as his brain. When Einstein wrote down those symbols, he was translating the music he had felt during those lonely nights in Bern into the language of mathematics. The architecture of curiosity. Einstein's miracle year proves that the greatest breakthroughs do not come from following the rules, but from questioning the foundation of the rules themselves. While the experts were trying to fix the old clock of Newtonian physics, Einstein was building a new one out of light and imagination. He showed us that curiosity is a more powerful engine than ambition. Ambition wants a title. Curiosity wants the truth. Ambition wants to be right. Curiosity wants to understand. Because he was an outsider, he had nothing to lose but his own misconceptions. Because he was a musician, he had the ears to hear a harmony that everyone else dismissed as noise. The lesson for us. We live in a world that is obsessed with thinking harder. Chúng ta được dạy to grind, to analyze, and to obsess over data. But Einstein's life tells us that the data is only half the story. If you are facing a wall in your own life, whether it is a creative block, a career crisis, or a personal struggle, perhaps the answer isn't in another spreadsheet or another hour of frantic thought. Perhaps the answer is in feeling deeper. Perhaps you need to pick up your own version of a violin. You need to step away from the logic of what should be and listen to the music of what could be. The legacy of 1905 is not just a set of equations. It is a reminder that one person, armed with nothing but a desk of curiosity and a willingness to listen to the hidden music of the world, can change the universe forever. You don't need permission to be a genius. You just need the courage to stop sleeping and start playing. There is a tragic irony in the pursuit of pure truth. When Albert Einstein stood in his small room in Bern, translating the vibrations of his violin into the language of E equals mc squared, he believed he was uncovering the beautiful, silent architecture of God. He was unlocking the secret of the stars, the mechanism that allows a sun to burn for billions of years, providing the warmth and light necessary for life to flourish. He saw a universe of harmony. But history has a cruel way of weaponizing beauty. Every discovery has a price, and for Einstein, that price was paid in the blinding flash of a mushroom cloud. As the decades passed, the elegant equation that once described the birth of galaxies was repurposed by a world at war. Einstein watched in horror as his life's work, the realization that mass and energy are one, was used to calculate the destructive force needed to burn cities to ash. The man who loved the hidden music of the universe was forced to hear the screams of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This was the ultimate paradox of his life. He had sought to understand the Old One's thoughts, only to provide the blueprint for man's most terrifying weapon, the mirror of ignorance. Einstein was a pacifist by nature, a man who believed in the brotherhood of humanity. Yet, he found himself at the center of a historical storm he could not control. He realized, with a heavy heart, that the power of the atom is not as dangerous as the power of human ignorance. Science, he understood, is morally neutral. It is a sharp blade that can either be a surgeon's scalpel or a soldier's sword. The atom has no malice. It simply follows the laws of physics. It is the human heart, polluted by greed, nationalism, and fear, that determines the outcome. This realization led to one of his most profound insights. Science can create the tool, but only morality can guide the hand. Without a spiritual and ethical compass, our technical brilliance is merely a more efficient way of ensuring our own destruction. We have mastered the forces of the heavens, but we have failed to master the impulses of our own nature, the radical simplicity of a soul. In his final years, as he walked the quiet streets of Princeton, Einstein underwent a transformation. He was no longer just a scientist. He had become a global icon, a secular saint, and a sage. Yet, as his fame grew to a deafening roar, his lifestyle became whisper quiet. He retreated into a radical simplicity that baffled the world. He famously stopped wearing socks. He refused to own a car, preferring to walk to his office every day. He let his hair grow wild, a silver halo that mirrored the chaotic brilliance of his thoughts. To the socialites and politicians of the era, he looked like a man who had lost his way, but in truth, he was a man who had finally found it. Why the bare feet on the grass? Why the refusal of the trappings of wealth and status? Because when you've understood the vastness of the universe, the expectations of the crowd become meaningless. When your mind has traveled to the edge of black holes and witnessed the curvature of time itself, the duty to wear matching socks or drive a luxury vehicle seems like a ridiculous comedy. Einstein had looked at the infinite, and the infinite had looked back. In that exchange, the ego, the part of us that craves approval and luxury, simply dissolved, the citizen of the universe. Einstein's simplicity was an act of rebellion. It was his way of saying that the things we chase, fame, power, possessions, are nothing more than shadows on a wall. He spent his final days advocating for world peace and nuclear disarmament, using his voice to warn humanity of the tools he had helped create. He was a man burdened by his own contribution to history, trying to pay a debt to the future. He became a citizen of the universe, belonging to no single nation and bound by no petty ideology. He spent his time answering letters from children, playing his violin, and working on a unified field theory, a final attempt to find a single equation that would explain everything. He never found it, but he died with a smile, knowing that the search itself was the reward. The Barefoot Path. There is a lesson for us in the twilight of Einstein's life. We live in an age of maximum noise and minimum meaning. We are told that success is measured by how much we can accumulate and how many people we can impress. We are under constant pressure to conform to the expectations of the crowd. Einstein's Barefoot Path invites us to walk in a different direction. It reminds us that our primary responsibility is not to the system, but to our own curiosity and our own moral compass. It tells us that true greatness is not found in the power we exert over others, but in the simplicity with which we treat ourselves. The man who unlocked the stars ended his journey by walking home in the rain, without a coat, lost in thought. He had given us the fire of the sun, but he left us with a much more important gift: the reminder that we must grow our souls as fast as we grow our technology. For in the end, the most powerful force in the universe isn't E equals mc squared. It is the simple, humble human who chooses to live for value rather than success. On April 18, 1955, in a quiet room at Princeton Hospital, the man who had decoded the secrets of the cosmos took his final breath. As the end approached, Albert Einstein began to speak in a low, rhythmic whisper. He was speaking in German, his mother tongue, the language of his childhood dreams and his first rebellious thoughts. However, the nurse attending to him did not understand German. In those fleeting, final moments, the specific meanings of his last words vanished into the air, becoming a secret known only to the universe he had loved so dearly. But it didn't matter. Einstein's life was never truly about the words he spoke. It was about the frequency on which he lived. His existence speaks a universal tongue that transcends borders, languages, and centuries. It is a language of courage, a dialect of the curious, and a symphony for the misfits. To look at his journey from a slow child to a weary sage is to hear a message that the world desperately needs to hear today: failure as a prelude to the miracle. The first lesson of this universal tongue is one of perspective. Failure is just a setup for a miracle year. We live in a culture that is terrified of the wrong answer. We treat a failed exam, a rejected application, or a stalled career as a terminal diagnosis. But Einstein's life tells a different story. If he had been a success in the eyes of his Munich teachers, he would have spent his life as a rigid, uninspired professor of classical physics. If he had found a prestigious university job right after graduation, he might have been too busy defending the status quo to ever think about the speed of light. His failure to fit in was his greatest blessing. The years he spent as a lonely tutor, the rejections he faced from the academic establishment, these were not obstacles. They were the incubation period. They provided the silence and the solitude necessary for 1905 to happen. The lesson is clear. If you are currently in a season of rejection or stagnation, you are not failing. You are being set up. You are being stripped of the distractions of success so that you can focus on the work that actually matters. Your miracle year is not a matter of luck. It is a matter of endurance. The sovereignty of curiosity. The second lesson Einstein leaves us with is a radical shift in values. Curiosity is more important than approval. We are conditioned to seek the gold star, the promotion, the likes, the validation of our peers. We often trade our why for a how do I look? But Einstein understood that the approval of the crowd is a cage. If he had cared about approval, he would have never dared to suggest that Newton was wrong. He would have never dared to suggest that time was a liquid rather than a solid. Curiosity is a form of intellectual sovereignty. It is the belief that your questions have more value than society's answers. Einstein didn't need a laboratory or a title to be curious. He only needed a violin and a quiet room. When you follow your curiosity, you are no longer a servant of the system. You are an explorer of reality. The world will call you distracted or impractical, but history will call you a visionary. The value of the soul. The third and perhaps most haunting lesson is his final piece of advice to a young student. Try not to become a person of success, but rather a person of value. We often confuse the two. Success is something that is measured by others. Value is something that is measured by your own heart. Success is what you take from the world. Value is what you give back to it. Einstein spent his final years living in a state of radical simplicity because he had reached a level of consciousness where success felt like a burden. He saw that a man's value isn't found in his Nobel Prize, but in his commitment to truth and his empathy for his fellow man. To be a person of value is to be a person who makes the universe feel a little less cold, a little less mysterious, and a little more like home for the rest of us. The outsider's invitation. Are you ready to question what the world calls obvious? Most of our lives are spent accepting the obvious, that time moves forward, that we must work until we are 65, that we must be afraid of those who are different from us. But Einstein's life proves that everything we call obvious is merely a lack of imagination. Your journey doesn't start with a degree, a budget, or a 5-year plan. It doesn't start with an answer that will please your boss or your parents. It starts with a violin, a compass, and the courage to be an outsider. It starts with the music of your own intuition. It starts with a needle that points toward a truth that no one else can see yet. Einstein is gone, and his last words are lost to time. But his life remains a lighthouse for every person who feels like they don't belong. He is whispering to us across the decades, telling us that the hidden music is still playing. All you have to do is stop listening to the crowd, pick up your bow, and start playing your own melody. The universe is waiting for your miracle.